Let's play ZORK. My OpenAI prompt will work with any adventure, but is there any demand? Hello, this is Robert Romano with comicsgate.org. Hit that subscribe button. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the way I was able to put together an OpenAI prompt that works with text adventures. One of the reasons I thought to do this was my love for ZORK and ZORK-like text adventures, but also games like Dungeons and Dragons, anything that's like an interactive role-playing game. One of the immediate uses that appeared to me very immediately when I started using ChatGPT was the ability to probably have it, at first it was like, oh, can I get it to make a menu? And it's like, oh, it can make a menu. It's like, oh, can it interact and, try to remember your place in a game? And it's like, oh, let's play ZORK. And it totally worked. And then kind of building out from there, I was able to refine the prompt to pretty much do any type of adventure that I wanted it to do. And so I eventually applied it to my own fantasy RPG, Children of the Grave. But I wanted to show you what the original game was actually like, because I think that's interesting. And I think it shows that there's actually a variety of applications for the GPTs such that we're seeing in the GPT store. One of them is going to be, make a ZORK-like game or just make your own interactive fiction games and things like that. Because interactive fiction, I think, is kind of it's not really a dead genre, but, it's very, very niche or niche that you're going to see, very few authors who are going to still write in using that type of software. And so I think the demand for such games isn't this what it used to be. But what I've noted in my previous live streams is that you can actually use it to make a graphic text adventure. So it's like, oh, you can include graphics. This thing can create graphics on the fly, create the story on the fly, keep your place in the story. And this is really early, kind of in the infancy of large language models. And what they will be capable of going forward once you get to, we're in GPT-4, but when you get to GPT-5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc., I think that the capabilities are going to be astounding. And I think you can make virtual kinds of holodecks. And I think that's interesting in its own right. Let me introduce you a little to ZORK. It's a text-based adventure game, first release. This is from Wikipedia by developers Tim Anderson, Mark Blank, Bruce Daniels, and David Lebling for the PDP-10 mainframe computer. I think what they did was they on the original internet, with MIT or DARPA or whatever, they actually made the rooms of the text adventure ZORK game be kind of web pages that you could interact with. The original developers and other companies and others, as the company Infocom, expanded and split the game into 3 titles: ZORK 1, The Great Underground Empire, ZORK 2, The Wizard of Frobaz, and ZORK 3, The Dungeon Master, which were released commercially for a range of personal computers beginning in 1980. It allows you to explore the abandoned Great Underground Empire in search of treasure. The player moves between the game's hundreds of locations and interacts with objects by typing commands in natural language that the game interprets. The program acts as a narrator describing the player's location and the results of the player's commands. It's been described as the most famous piece of interactive fiction. Now, the original game, developed between 1977 and 1979 at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, was inspired by Colossal Cave Adventure, the first well-known example of interactive fiction and the first well-known adventure game. The developers wanted to make a similar game that was able to understand more complicated sentences than Adventure's 2-word commands. In 1979, they founded Infocom with several other colleagues at the MIT Computer Center. Blank and Joel Perez created a way to run a smaller portion of ZORK on several brands of microcomputers. So originally it was one big game. ZORK 1, ZORK 2, ZORK 3 were all one big game. But then they had to compress it for the space that was available at the time on these tiny little computers, microcomputers, letting them commercialize the game as Infocom's first products. The first episode was published by Personal Software in 1980, after which Infocom purchased the rights and self-published all 3 episodes in late 1981. ZORK was a massive success, for Infocom, with sales increasing for years as the market for personal computers expanded. The first episode sold more than 38,000 copies in 1982, around 150,000 copies. Collectively, the 3 episodes sold more than 680,000 copies through 1986, comprising more than 1/3 of Infocom sales in the period. And then it was eventually purchased by Activision, leading to new ZORK games beginning in 1987. You get the idea. There's the gameplay. It's a text adventure. The development. I wanted to at least go a little into what they did to get this thing working in the first place. They did this again, a computer science research division at Dynamic Modeling Group in 1977 at Massachusetts Institute for Technology Laboratory for Computer Science. So Tim Anderson, Mark Blank, Bruce Daniels, and David Lebling. Anderson, Blank, and Daniels were students, and Lebling was a research staff member. Again, it was inspired by Colossal Cave Adventure, a text-based game. And then they wanted to kind of expand on that. Adventure was immensely popular among the small population of computer users at the time, and a big hit at MIT. By the end of May, players had managed to completely solve it, so they were kind of bored, and they wanted to keep on playing. But it was like, oh, let's make our own. So they designed a game that would be a better text adventure with inputs more complex. They believed that their division's MDL programming language would be better suited for processing complex text units than the Fortran code used in Adventure. The group was familiar with creating video games. Blank and Anderson had worked on a multiplayer trivia game called Trivia. Lebling had worked on Maze, a first-person shooter, and the first 3D first-person game ever made. How's that? How about that? David Lebling, he made Maze, the first 3D game ever. Lebling first created the natural language input system, or parser, that could process type 2 word instructions. Anderson and Blank built a small prototype text game to use it. ZORK's prototype was built for the Digital Equipment Corporation PDP-10 mainframe computer, the only system that supported their programming language. And then while Lebling took a 2-week vacation, Anderson, Blank, and Daniels designed an adventure game concept, which Anderson and Blank then developed as an early version of ZORK. This prototype contained simple versions of many concepts seen in the final game, including puzzles and locations. According to Anderson, quote, "It took time for people to learn how to write good problems. And Lebling's first complex parser was only, quote, almost as smart as Adventures." The game was unnamed, but the group had a habit of naming their program ZORK until they were completed, a term in the MIT community for an in-development program. The group, referring to themselves as the implementers, which would become imps, continued working on the game after Lebling returned, adding features and iterating on the parser through June 1977. Grooves were added to replace pits that would kill players in the dark. While playtesting, Lebling noticed that his character fell into a pit while in the attic of the house. Lebling contends that Adventure was one of ZORK's only influences, as there were few other games to emulate at the time. Although the game's combat is based on Dungeons and Dragons, Lebling said the other developers had never played it. He also thought of the parser and associated text responses as taking on the role of the dungeon master from a Dungeons and Dragons game, trying to lead the player through a story solely by describing it. And eventually this thing gets put onto ARPANET, as I was stating. The developers did not announce their game while it was in development, but a lack of security on the MIT systems meant that anyone who could access the PDP-10 computer over the ARPANET to see what programs were being run. As a result, the small community of people, many of whom had been involved in playing and contributing to Trivia, the other game that they had come up with, would snoop on the system for new programs. They found the new ZORK adventure game and spread word of it under that name. This community, dozens or possibly hundreds of players, according to Lebling, interacted with the developers as they created the game, playtesting additions and submitting bug reports. The implementers added a command transcript feature to keep track of what commands players tried to use unsuccessfully. So they actually were using it to debug it. It's like, oh, if they're going to log into our ZORK system, let's just keep track of what they're typing. So we'll have feedback on what commands aren't working, and then they could expand the vocabulary in the game. So kind of give you an idea of what this kind of sounds like a language model, ultimately, like one that like a later iteration. So by June, the game had approximately half the size of the final ZORK and had a substantial community of players for the time. The group added locations such as a volcano and coal mine, and soon shifted their efforts to improving the game's engine and adding the ability to save the player's progress. Following user requests, they also added the ability to run the game on the PDB-10 computers running different operating systems, which were much more popular at the time operating than the incompatible time-sharing system operating that the MIT computer used. These users then set up a mailing list to distribute updates. The developers returned to creating new content in the fall of 1977, adding the Alice in Wonderland section and a system of fighting enemies around, and then it goes on. Eventually, it's going to lead to success. They're going to found Infocom, and then they're going to be. This will be one of the most famous computer games ever created. And so I wanted to show it to you, and then kind of ask the question whether there's any demand for something like this. In the GPT store, we can't release a ZORK game in the GPT store, but we can make text adventures. So maybe Children of the Grave, I've dropped it into the GPT store. And this isn't fully implemented yet. I still can't get to it myself inside of ChatGPT. So I think they're still rolling it out on a beta basis. But there is some apps out there that let you kind of get a gander for what's in the GPT store. And so I wanted to see, oh, there must be other people who are doing RPGs. And sure enough, there's a bazillion of them. In general, there's more than 3 million GPTs and counting that have been created using the GPT engine that OpenAI has put out there. But there's going to be incredible competition. And so if there's demand for one big game or one game that's awesome, it might be one of these RPGs that's coming out. But they all seem to be very similar to what the concept I had come up with. So you see like DM GPT, Dungeon Master GPT, RPG, Architect, fighting fantasy creator, quick NPC. So people want to use this to make games, and I think that's really cool. But it also means that with the millions of GPTs, that the market's going to be completely flooded. Will it even be a marketplace? Like, how do you even make money doing something like this? Like, I think the game is pretty cool. But I also wanted to, let's hit no thanks here. I wanted to show you this article from Alberto Romero. He says that because I was trying to figure out a way on my own website, childrenofthegrave.com, if there was a way to, with JavaScript, kind of put a layer on top of ChatGPT or OpenAI that could implement parts of the game so that everything would not have to be included in ChatGPT. It's like, oh, just launch it in ChatGPT and play it. That's fun. But it was having trouble keeping track of coordinates, the rooms, what characters were being played, especially if you wanted to do the kind of a party of adventurers mode. So I tried to, and I successfully completed coding on that using ChatGPT to help out with the coding, to kind of create a layer on top of that and to send calls through the API. But with the GPTs and the GPT store, the idea of launching, using the API for OpenAI might not be as feasible or as a good idea business-wise. But ultimately, it might be necessary if I want to have JavaScript and a layer operating on top of it. This talks about trying to implement it over an API. Let's see, it doesn't matter how much you tweak or improve a car with a small engine to make it faster. It will always be worse than a car with a big and powerful engine. This is the dilemma that so-called thin wrapper AI startups like Jasper and Ask Your PDF businesses built as an application layer on top of an large language model like GPT-4, facing competing against model building companies like OpenAI, Google, or Meta, which release better models every year and new features every month, all of which threaten to kill entire spaces where these GPT wrappers are trying to survive. Let's continue reading. Okay. Are just trying to survive. ChatGPT's birth was the inflection point. How could Jasper, one of the first GPT wrappers and likely the most successful, compete now against GPT-4 backed ChatGPT with just some fine tuning on top that increases the price of the service 4 times as a result? So I could release Children of the Grave on the website and put the JavaScript on top, but then I have to calculate how much is it going to cost to run the game over the API. And then I have to charge a premium on top of that just to keep the services running. There's games like AI Dungeon, I believe, or Dungeon AI. I forget what, I think it's AI Dungeon, that basically are similar. They're text adventures. And also a lot of people have had this idea. But you know, for something like that, how much are you going to have to pay per month? For Jasper, just to run GPT over some other website, $80 a month. But ChatGPT Plus only costs $20 a month. So it's like, oh, you know, maybe the website's not the way to go. Maybe I need to put this thing into the GPT store and just run it there, and then try to lead development that way, and try to make the best GPT game that's out there. You know, try to compete with the hundreds or thousands of other potentially similar games. Once OpenAI gets at its bigger engine, ChatGPT 4.5 or GPT-5, likely much cheaper than $80 a month, it won't matter how good Jasper's fine-tuning of GPT-4 was. It will always be the smaller engine trying to compete against the big one. This is no different than the bitter lesson. Your craft ingenuity is worthless against scale, data, and compute. And that's Jasper's, and the other GPT wrappers are much worse off. So then he says, but there's a silver lining. Common sense says Jasper is dead. It just doesn't know it yet. But although the company is not going through its best moment, it's not giving signs of being insolvent. I think there's a simple explanation for why thin wrapper AI startups that are already successful in terms of user base or revenue should not fear being killed by subsequent models and or competitive features like GPTs, which OpenAI announced back in November, or the GPT store it just launched. Narrow but deep often beats broad and shallow. OpenAI is like the New York Times, NYT, pun intended, in that it wants to attract the largest number of customers. That requires versatile products like ChatGPT, which is a proto-general purpose AI system. Likewise, the New York Times has a section for everything but specializes in nothing. That allows GPT wrapper specialists to fill up gaps in niches that OpenAI won't bother covering. That's also the reason why funnier models like Grok or steerable ones like Mixtral can thrive. Similarly, tech magazines like TechCrunch, Wired, or The Information narrow their focus to avoid competing against the New York Times directly. So maybe what he's saying is, if you specialize, like maybe making the computer game version of this and launching it on the website could still be viable, because it's going to have JavaScript running it. It's going to remember the coordinates every time correctly. It's going to have a combat system that's going to implement it the same way every single time. And then you can implement rules that maybe the GPT is not going to follow so faithfully. In any event, I think it works just fine inside of ChatGPT. So I just want to say, let's just jump right in and let's play ZORK. This is ZORK 4. I just say make a direct sequel to ZORK 3. I have very special instructions inside of the game prompt itself. Let's see, we can get rid of that. We can zoom in here a little. ZORK 4, the return of the adventurer. I tell it to make up a title for the game every time. So sometimes it's the return of the adventurer. Sometimes it's the return of the dungeon master. But in any event, I wanted to just start west of house. This is one of the original locations in the game. You find yourself in an open field west of a white house with a boarded front door. Time has aged the house. Vines climb its sides. The once well-tended garden is now overgrown. I told it to jump forward 30 years or 40 years. It's been 40 years since the ZORK games. So I tell it to jump forward 40 years into the future. Here's all the locations. I include as much information as possible into the prompt so that it's going to have familiar locations from the great underground empire. I put a link in the description. You can try it out if you like. But obviously I can't release this in the GPT store because, ZORK, whatever, Activision owns that. I'm not trying to infringe on copyright. This was an experiment. So this is just a kind of fun to say, hey, you can make your own text adventure. I even managed to get it to display in the code block. That if you use ChatGPT and for coding, you'll note that, oh, you can do code block. I was like, oh, it would be cool if the ZORK game was in code block. So I said, oh yeah, implement that. And it was able to do it very successfully, I think. To the north, the house looms silent and dark. A rusty mailbox, leaning slightly, stands to the south. The path leading east and west hints at adventures once lived and those yet to come. There's a rusty mailbox, so we're going to open the rusty mailbox. All right, open rusty mailbox, and right, and then it's going to. There you go. There's you creak open the rusty mailbox, revealing a dusty and faded envelope lying inside. The envelope, sealed and unopened, bears the mark of the great underground empire's postal service, a service long forgotten in these lands. The envelope is addressed to the last adventurer in faded ink. It seems to have been waiting here for many years, perhaps for you. The sealed envelope. What's open envelope and read letter. Read letter. All right. All right. Opening the envelope, you find a letter written in meticulous hand. The ink, though faded, still tells its tale. Dearest adventurer, if you are reading this, you are the last hope of the great underground empire. The lands have fallen into disrepair and darkness since you last walked these paths. Your absence has been felt across the realms. The empire needs you once more to restore balance and light. Your journey begins anew. Be brave. Yours in adventure, Dimwit Flathead. This is pulling in characters from the original ZORK series. Again, I found like fan walkthroughs of the original ZORK games, so I could include all of the locations and as many fan websites as possible. I said, let's just take that material and drop it into the prompt so that it has as much information about the ZORK lands, the Great Underground Empire as possible. So here's Dimwit Flathead. And he says, P.S. Beware the lurking grue. It knows grooves. It knows Dimwit Flathead. It's able to. And so one of the reasons I wanted to try it this way was because this means that you could take your own world and drop it in using my prompts or something like it to make your own adventure game that's going to be able to kind of keep track. I mean, if I go forward like 10 spaces and then I backtrack, it might not remember the rooms that came before it. And so it needs more memory. It needs a way of, I think, of having a database so that when it creates a room, it compiles it into the database. And then when you travel back to those coordinates, it can see, oh, that's that room. And then just pull that information out and pull that room's history out as a way of persistently doing this. Or it could just be when you get to GPT 4.5, 5, or 6, or whatever, that's just simply able to remember the entire conversation, which would also work. If it can just remember the entire conversation and the coordinates, it'll be able to go back and review the conversation history and do it that way. Okay, so beware the lurking grue. So I guess we can take that. Let's take the take letter into inventory. Let's see. Where do we want to go? All right, and I guess we could go into the forest. Seems like going in the original ZORK, you would go into the house, and then there's like a way to get into the Great Underground Empire. So take letter and head east. All right. You venture east along a narrow path that snakes through a dense forest. The trees are old and towering, their branches forming a canopy above. Sunlight filters through the leaves, creating a dappled pattern on the forest floor. The air is thick with the smell of moss and earth. It's peaceful here, yet you can't shake off the feeling that eyes may be watching from the shadows. A small wooden sign nailed to a tree reads, "Beware of Elbereth." Okay. What should we do now? Should we go further into the forest? South to a slight clearing? Let's go east further into forest. Let's see, 5 turns. Does it remember my turns? 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's so far it's remembering how many turns. It's incrementing that perfectly. So far, no errors here. Okay. You find yourself deeper within the forest. The trees here are even older, their trunks wide and gnarled. A thick mist clings to the ground, obscuring your view of the path ahead. The silence of the forest is occasionally broken by distant, unidentifiable sounds adding to the eerie atmosphere. A small wooden footbridge crosses a babbling brook. The water is clear, reflecting the few rays of light that manage to penetrate the dense canopy. So now there's a steep rocky incline to the east, south, path towards clearing, west back to the less dense forest. All right, I'll try south to the clearing, but if we don't find anything, I'm going to want to go back to that house before the game forgets that there's a house. Now we're at the forest clearing. This should be all familiar, very familiar. Okay. Ooh, what does the Gru look like? There's a statue of a Gru. Okay. The path leads you to a serene clearing. Sunlight streams through the break in the trees, illuminating a small pond in the center. The water is crystal clear, and you can see colorful fish swimming lazily. Wildflowers dot the edges of the pond. Their fragrance mix in with the fresh pine scent of the forest. A stone bench covered in moss invites a moment of rest. Nearby, a weathered statue of a Gru stands as a silent guardian of the clearing. Now, this is wrong. I say it's wrong because nobody's ever seen a Gru. If you go underground and you're in the dark, Grus, and it's pitch black, then you're likely to be eaten by a Gru. So no one survived seeing a Gru. If you saw a Gru, it would eat you and you'd be dead. That's what happens in the game. There's no way to defeat the Grus. It was a way of basically, you have a lantern, your trusty lantern. Okay, so but we can examine it. What does OpenAI think the Gru statue? Examine the Gru statue. What does it look like? And how did anyone survive seeing a Gru to make a statue? Let's just ask it. Like, this isn't right. All right. You closely examined the Gru statue. It is expertly crafted, depicting the mythical creature with exaggerated, terrifying features, elongated claws, sharp teeth, and menacing eyes. The statue, made of dark stone, stands about 4 feet tall. It's an accurate representation of a Gru, according to the folklore of the Great Underground Empire. Okay, so there's folklore of the Great Underground Empire, and so whoever the carver was, the sculptor, they based it on the folklore. They didn't see a Gru themselves. As to how someone survived seeing a Gru to create this statue, it is likely the work of a skilled sculptor who used tales and descriptions passed down through generations, rather than through direct observation. Grus are legendary for dwelling in the dark and being rarely seen. So there we go. That's interesting. So I had to ask a question, and it seemed to be like, oh yeah, I was hinting that there's something wrong, because I was like, how did anyone survive? And the game's like, oh yeah, I think you're right. So okay, we're almost running out of time here, so we can just head back north. And then let's see if we can backtrack to the house. All right, now we're in the deep forest. You retrace your steps back into the deep forest. The mist still lingers, dampening the sounds around you. The path winds through the ancient trees, their trunks covered in thick moss. Everything feels still and timeless, as if this part of the forest has remained unchanged for centuries. You notice something glinting in the underbrush off to the side of the path. It looks like a small metallic object. Okay, partially buried in leaf litter. Okay, look at metallic object. What is it? Take it. Let's find out what it is before we take it. Could be like something dangerous. You discover it's a small brass key, the metallic object, as we inspect it, partially covered by tree leaves and dirt. The key, though aged, is still in good condition. It's ornate with intricate designs etched onto the surface, suggesting it might unlock something valuable or significant. The origin and purpose of this key remain a mystery, waiting to be uncovered by your adventure. Take brass key and head west. We're trying to see if the White House is still going to be there. You head west, retracing your steps along the forest path. The trees begin to thin out. The light becomes brighter as you approach the edge of the forest. The path here is more defined, with occasional footprint visible in the mud, a reminder of other adventurers who may have passed this way. Or I just came from this way, and it could be my own footprints. Okay, so actually, yes, it remembers that the White House is still there. That's pretty cool. And how many paces did we go? We had gone eight turns. Let's see, 8, 7, up 7. So it did forget when I asked what the metallic object was. It didn't count that as a turn, but taking it and heading west, it did count it as a turn. Sealed letter. So why did it do that? Oh, so I see. It seems to only think a turn is when you move. That's interesting. I have to refine the prompt to say, no matter what you do, it's a turn. As long as the command processes. Okay, so let's head west. Let's see if we can go in the house. I want to see if we can get underground. I want to find the lantern. And you find yourself back in the open field west of the White House. The house with the boarded front door stands silent and imposing. The rusty mailbox, now open, reminds you of the letter you found. The overgrown, so it's remembering what I've done in the game so far very well. The overgrown garden whispers of neglect and times past. Okay, so let's go north towards the White House. See there, it went from 9 to 10 because we moved. So it thinks that moving creates a turn. You stand north of the White House. The building, if we were west of house, shouldn't we have gone west? In any event, you stand north of the White House. The building looks even more imposing from this angle. Several windows dot the facade, all boarded up. The once granted entrance is sealed shut, but there's a small window that is slightly ajar. It appears to be the only accessible point. An old, overgrown garden spreads out to the east where a faint path leads through the weeds. Okay, let's go through the window. Go through slightly ajar window. Yep, we're in the kitchen. You manage to squeeze through the ajar window. We're breaking and entering, and find yourself in what appears to be the kitchen of the house. The room is in disarray, dishes piled up, dust covering every surface, and an old faded wallpaper peeling from the walls. An ancient refrigerator stands to one side, its door slightly open. There's an old wooden table in the center covered with various knickknacks. A door to the west leads into another room. I guess let's look in the refrigerator. And then without giving any hint about what we think we might find, just say, look in there and see what it comes up with. The refrigerator we open it, revealing its contents. Assorted items, inside there's an assortment of items, most of which have long since spoiled. However, amidst the unpleasantness, you notice a surprisingly well-preserved wedge of cheese. It seems to have been protected from the ravages of time by a magical aura, a common preservation technique in the Great Underground Empire. All right, take well preserved wedge of cheese. In one of the games, you found some whey bread or something, and then you had to feed it to a man who was starving. It was one of the tests in the game. So sometimes cheese food could come in handy. You take the well-preserved wedge of cheese and add it to your inventory. Despite its age, it seems to be in perfect condition, possibly imbued with a bit of magic to keep it fresh. You can't help but wonder what purpose it might serve in your adventure. Okay, so window goes outside again, and so we're going to go west into the other room, and then we're almost out of time here. We're in the living room now. You step into what was once a cozy living room. An ornamental rug covers the floor, and a grand fireplace dominates the north wall, though it hasn't seen a fire in ages. Dusty portraits hang on the walls depicting figures from a bygone era. A large, comfortable sofa faces the fireplace. There's a bookshelf to the east lined with old books and trinkets. Examine books. And then we'll try moving the rug. Okay, so let's see. You peruse the bookshelf, finding a collection of books that range from ancient tomes to more recent publications, the lore of the Great Underground Empire, a detailed history of the rise and fall of the empire, the art of magic in ZORK, discussing various magical artifacts, memoirs of a Gru, a fictional tale from the perspective of a Gru. All right, let's read memoirs. I like the sense of humor that it's coming up with here. This is very Zorkian in my view. Read memoirs of a Gru. What are the table of contents? This is good. If you focus in on a book in the game, any one of these games, ZORK or Children of the Grave, and you say, give me the table of contents. Then I'll give you all the chapters, and then you can say, read chapter 1, read chapter 2. So we can read from the book. Let's see what it comes up with. As you open Memoirs of a Gru, you find the following table of contents. In the darkness we dwell, the echoes of footsteps, shadows and sorcery, tales of the enchanted forest, the Gru's gourmet, whispered legends, and beyond the light. Each chapter seems to explore different aspects of a Gru's life and experiences, blending mythology with a touch of whimsy and darkness. Okay, who wrote it? Who is the author of Memoirs of a Gru? Author of Memoirs of a Gru. Upon inspecting Memoirs of a Gru, you notice that the author's name is not mentioned anywhere in the book. This is not uncommon for books within the Great Underground Empire, where many works are published anonymously, often due to the mystical and secretive nature of their content. Very well. Let's read chapter 1, In the Darkness That We Dwell. Read chapter 1. Let's see if it remembers the name of chapter 1. In Darkness We Dwell, Memoirs of a Gru, Chapter 1. This chapter introduces the life of a Gru from its own perspective. It describes the Gru's existence in the perpetual darkness of the underground world. The narrative portrays a sense of pride in the Gru's ability to navigate and thrive in the dark, mysterious environments of the Great Underground Empire. The chapter sets the tone, a tone of mystery and intrigue, hinting at deeper secrets and tales yet to be revealed. Okay, let's see. Chapter 2 should be Echoes of Footsteps. Okay, read chapter 2. The Echoes of Footsteps, Memoirs of a Gru, Chapter 2. Chapter 2 delves into the sensory world of a Gru, focusing on how they perceive their surroundings through sound. It details the Gru's acute hearing and ability to detect the slightest footsteps of adventurers in the dark. No wonder we kept getting eaten by the Grus. The chapter creates an atmosphere of tension and anticipation as the Gru waits in the shadows, guided by the echoes of unseen travelers above. Okay, so chapter 3, Shadows and Sorcery. Okay, read chapter 3. So I should note that it's not actually, it's not pre-creating the game. It's not like saying, here's the map of the entire game, and then it's going to pre-generate all that and have all these items in there and then have it all written. It's doing this completely on the fly. That's the way large language models work. It's a probabilistic form of basically of writing. Just kind of, so imagine a probability machine that knows what the next word in a sentence is going to be. That's my understanding of how a large language model works. And in this case, if you give it enough information about ZORK and how to play this game, It can do it in, I think, a very convincing manner. Memoirs of a Gru, Chapter 3, Shadows and Sorcery. Chapter 3 explores the relationship between Grus and the magical elements of the great underground empire. It discusses various encounters with enchanted artifacts and sorcerers, detailing how magic influences and intertwines with the existence of Grus. This chapter paints a picture of a world where the boundaries between the physical and magical are blurred, adding a layer of complexity to the Grus narrative. I think we're almost through the book here. Let's see. Want to keep reading it? Let's keep reading it. See if anyone's in the chat. If someone's making fun of the way I talk, Mr. Solomon says, "Did you say plug?" My pronunciation and enunciation often leave much to be desired. I'm working on it, though. I'm working on it, Mr. Solomon. Let's see here. Go back to the game here. All right, did we do what did we do? Chapter 3 or 4? And we're going to do Tales of the Enchanted Forest. So we'll say read chapter 4. So what I'm trying to establish is read chapter 4. Is whether it can remember, how far back in the game can it remember. And then if we went back outside, would the forest still be where the forest was? Memoirs of a Gru, Tales of the Enchanted Forest. This chapter weaves tales of the Gru's adventures in the enchanted forest. I imagine it has to go out at nighttime. A mysterious and magical part of the underground world. It describes encounters with mythical creatures, hidden treasures, and magical phenomena. The narrative conveys a sense of wonder and danger, highlighting the Gru's curiosity and resilience in the face of the forest's enchantments and perils. So let's see. Now, chapter 5. We're almost done. The Gru's Gourmet. Let's see. Read chapter 5. See how many if we get to the last chapter and it still remembers the names of the chapters, I'll be impressed. Okay, Memoirs of a Gru, chapter 5, The Gru's Gourmet. Chapter 5 offers a rather peculiar insight into the dietary habits of a Gru. It humorously details various culinary preferences and peculiarities, painting a picture of the Gru as a connoisseur of the empire. The chapter touches on the Gru's fondness for certain adventurers and the particular flavors they bring, blending a dark sense of humor with the Gru's notorious reputation. All right, read chapter 6. While that's loading, we'll see what chapter 6 should have been called. Should be Whispered Legends. All right. Whispered Legends, Chapter 6, Memoirs of a Gru. Chapter 6 delves into the lore and legends surrounding Grus, told from the Gru's perspective. It recounts tales passed down through generations of Grus, featuring epic battles, legendary adventurers, and ancient mysteries of the great underground empire. This chapter gives a sense of depth to the Gru's culture, revealing a rich heritage and a connection to the broader history and mythology of the underground realms. Read chapter 7. All right, read chapter 7. While that's loading, we'll see what chapter 7 should have been called. So it should be, and this is the final chapter, Beyond the Light. See, did we remember the entire book? Didn't remember anything. Like I said, it's making this up on the fly, but it is remembering the conversation, so that's very important. Memoirs of a Gru, chapter 7, Beyond the Light. The final chapter, and notice it's the final chapter, that's good too, speculates on what lies beyond the familiar darkness for a Gru. It's a philosophical exploration of the unknown and the potential of new discoveries. This is deep. The chapter is introspective, contemplating the existence of places where Grus have never ventured and pondering the possibilities that lie in the light. It ends on a note of curiosity and longing, a stark contrast to the usual portrayal of Grus as creatures of the dark. Maybe it was written by a Gru. Although, how would he write if there was no light? How can a Gru write? So maybe we should just ask the question. How do you think a Gru wrote this if there was no light by which to write. The idea of a Gru writing memoirs of a Gru is indeed a curious one, as Grus are creatures of the dark and are said to fear light. It's possible the book is a work of fiction written by an imaginative author who adopted the perspective of a Gru. Alternatively, the book could be a compilation of Gru legends and stories passed down orally, later transcribed by someone else, into written form. I think this is brilliant. I'm loving this playthrough of ZORK 4, in this case, The Return of the Adventurer. It's able to take aspects of the Great Underground Empire, detailed knowledge that I've included in the prompt, and then insert it into the story. It makes up the story as it goes along. I think this is a very successful playthrough. I'm very excited about this. And yeah, I mean, but we can't sell ZORK 4. But what you could do, say you purchase an adventure, a PDF adventure, and you just want to plug it into ChatGPT, you can totally do that. And you can say, let's play this, kind of RPG adventure into, and I'll show you other examples of this, that you can just take old modules and just drop them into ChatGPT, and then it's going to recreate it, albeit, making up the story as it goes along. Now I could try to see if it could follow directions of an adventure step by step and include all the details and play it that way. But I think it's been, at least as I was experimenting with the prompt, it always seemed to do better with saying, make up the story as you go along. And I think one of the reasons for that is because it's very imaginative. It's not going to do a bad job, as you can see here. And so it may work better that way. And sometimes when you're doing research with ChatGPT, it'll just make up facts. So even if I told it to follow an adventure, it might not. It might deviate from that, using its own creativity. So I just say, well, anything goes. Make up the story as you go along, but here's some guidelines. And so I think that's a successful way to do it. This is ZORK 4. It's just a fun module that I came up with. Oh, and Mr. Solomon says, that plug is actually a reference to old adventure games. I have to go back and play adventure. If Mr. Solomon, say plug was a command related to say Zizzy. This is the old lore, son. All right. Well, I didn't play adventure too much. I did play lots of ZORK. Yeah, the original text adventure. I mean, I do remember that game, but we never got very far into it. We had a Commodore 64. I do remember we had adventure, but we didn't get very far with it. Another one was cool, I think it was like Wizard's Castle or something. I think we had one called Wizard's Castle. Now I want to go find adventure. Mr. Solomon says, you are in a twisty maze of passageways, all alike. I'll tell you, when in some of the earlier iterations of using ChatGPT, particularly over the API, I would wind up in passageways that would go on forever. And eventually I have to ask it, I say, you need to make sure each room is unique. And it was like, oh, I'm trying to create a sense of foreboding. Oh, you don't like being trapped in a maze that goes on forever? Aren't you having fun? Isn't this fun? It's like literally a hallway that went on for like 20 paces. And so it was it having trouble remembering? Was it getting stuck in some sort of loop? I've noticed similar behavior, as a matter of fact, when I've plugged these prompts into Grok. So it could be that the more advanced models are, or the less advanced models are going to have you stuck in twisty maze of passageways all alike. Mr. Solomon says, I bet if you put one of those commands into ZORK, it would have a programmed response. You mean my ZORK? Or like the actual ZORK? Mr. Solomon, yeah, machines don't know. That's not fun. Yeah, to be stuck in the maze. If you put one of those commands into ZORK, it would have a programmed response. Let's see. Say plug. Well, one that's pre-programmed in the game was If you say ZORK, it should say at your service. Let's see what that does. I think that was one of the pre-programmed ones, but I don't think anything's pre-programmed here because like we didn't put, but let's see if it remembers. If it does it know that if you say ZORK, it should say at your service. You have entered the command ZORK. Please provide a specific command or action for your adventure in the world of ZORK 4. For example, you can move to a different location, examine an object and use an item in your inventory, or interact with something in your current environment. So that's kind of disappointing. It didn't do the pre-programmed response. Okay, so he wants me to say Izzy. Zizzy. I don't know. How do you even pronounce that? Is it Zizzy? I didn't watch from the beginning. Okay, let's see. We'll try it. Say Zizzy. Say Zizzy. Is that how you spell it? Okay, that's how you spell it. Okay. Say Zizzy. I don't think it's going to work. I mean, it's going to have the adventurer say Zizzy, and then it's going to be like living room. Okay, let's see what it does. As you utter the mystical word Zizzy, a strange feeling washes over you, but nothing in your surroundings appears to change. It seems that the magic of that word, so potent in the tales of old, has lost its power in this part of the great underground empire. Or perhaps it works in ways yet unknown to you. Wait a second. No one agrees on the actual. What was saying Zizzy supposed to do? What was saying Zizzy supposed to do, Mr. Solomon? Stay with me, man. I need to know now. Like, do I have to Google this? Oh man, what does it say, Zizzy? Let's look that up. All right, we can look that up. We'll go to Google and we'll just type in "say Zizzy." Oh, it's Zizzy. Is it Zizzy or Zizzy like that? How did I write it? Zizzy. Oh, it was with Z's. Okay, yeah. Say Zizzy. What's that supposed to do? Magic words. Okay. Zizzy. Say Zizzy. Nothing happens. This is from Colossal Cave Adventure. I mean, my thinking is, let's see, magic words. Okay, homepage documentation. Many fantasy games incorporate the idea of magic words that can be spoken. So the OpenAI ZORK 4 did recognize it as a magical word. In implementing these, we want to be able to be a bit flexible and accept the range of inputs, regardless of whether the player explicitly speaks the command aloud. Zizzy, say Zizzy, or perhaps even cast Zizzy. The inventively named Zizzy demonstrates how we might define such a command. If we want to go even further and allow the player to use quotation marks, as in, say, quote, Zizzy, we may want to include punctuation removal by Emily Short, which allows for quotation marks to be stripped out of the player's input before it is understood. Best example, Zizzy. Basics of adding a new command reviewed for the case of the simple magic word Zizzy. What is this? Inform. Oh, this is Inform. Inform is the actual interactive fiction editor. So one of my ideas was that the let's see. Says he didn't watch from the beginning. No one agrees on the actual pronunciations. He says, there you go. And I say, what's Zizzy supposed to do? He says, unknown. Don't remember. So I think, in any event, my one idea I had was that these interactive fictions, they could have been used to train the large language model. So when I started playing ZORK, it seemed like it was better at creating a familiar terrain for ZORK. Probably because it's a really famous game. There's information available at that time. It had only had information up to 2021 on the internet, and so it would have had all the information from all the ZORK fan websites, basically, that were on the web at the time of ChatGPT, and it seemed like it was able to get deeper into ZORK than my own game without providing enough information. So in the more recent iteration of Children of the Grave, I've been able to get more information about the game and the world into it. And I think it's a fairly faithful representation of what the world might be like. And, in this case, in the mind of a a large language model, to the extent I don't think it has a mind. I don't think it's thinking. But it's possible that it was trained using, interactive fiction games like Colossal Cave Adventure, like ZORK, like Dungeons and Dragons. Although Dungeons and Dragons was never a text adventure, I always thought it should be. Though I was like, why isn't TSR making text adventures for Dungeons and Dragons? Wouldn't that be awesome? And now that there's a bazillion of these things. Maybe they will. Maybe these virtual tabletops will start to make use of GPTs. Maybe you could have you could even use this though. I think that this could be potentially useful just to create new rooms for a maze, like have a randomly generated maze, and then just take what the GPT throws at the dungeon master, and then he can just implement that into his tabletop right there on the fly. I think that's possible. And so I'm still probably going to keep going with creating the website version of these games so that there can be some rules, there can be some JavaScript overlaid to it. But I really need those API costs to go down. In any event, we'll check the chat one more time here. I think we're done though. All right. And we can this is Robert Romano with comicsgate.org. This is my version of ZORK. I think it's pretty cool. I think there's almost no demand though for these types of games, but that's okay. Maybe there's demand for my prompt, and that we can maybe that can be utilized by other people who want to make their own adventures. So maybe the thing to sell is not the game, but the prompt that makes the game. And then people will be like, oh, well, Robert's prompt is better than everyone else's prompt. So then maybe, copyright it and make sure that, I can get credit for it. And, because everyone's going to use it. It's like, well, they're just going to drop it in. They're just going to copy and paste it. My initial inclination was to release it as open game content. I think I'll stick with that plan. There's actually already a version of the prompt that you can get on childrenofthegrave.com. If you scroll to the bottom of the page, you'll see where there's an open game content. You can click on that, and then you can see what the original prompt was kind of like. And you can utilize it to make any world, any game, and have a game like this one. Now, there's some additional prompting that I've come up with that might be slightly more sophisticated. But again, this is Robert Romano with comicsgate.org. We've been playing ZORK. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good evening.